crisis, the pregnant pause, post-COVID, until our freedoms are restored, and Department of Workforce Solutions, equal workforce issues.
Well, here we are, episode 1. It's like
Oh my God, the work it took to get the pilot off the ground.
no, but here we are. I think
Welcome.
it's another venture for us, is it not, T?
Yeah, this has been a long time coming. This is more of our grown-up version of making political commentary. New
Well,
Mexico Rising, though I'm not 100% behind the title, let's go with it for now. Welcome.
wow, that's how honest we're going to be. We're just going to trash the show right from the beginning.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
the objective, right? Yeah, well, it shows that we're real. I'm keeping it 100 or real, or I don't know when keeping it real goes wrong. You remember the Chappelle sketch? But yeah, no. But hey, welcome you guys to New Mexico Rising. This is, well, if you don't know my name, I'm Thaddeus Preston, aka Nick Way, one of the co-hosts of the Armenian Council for Truth and Journalism, and thank you for your servers when we occasionally do that digest. And of course, you know who this man is. But introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Sean. I've been all over the country covering different things. I intend to keep doing that. I have come under some trouble lately. We don't have to really get into that here. Most people have kind of come up with their own conclusions about that, which, I don't think is really fair. So we're here. We're doing something else. We're going to be dealing with New Mexico issues, New Mexico topics, because quite frankly, we love this state for lots of reasons. But there's also a lot of problems that we need to pick into. So
no doubt.
We'll do that together.
So let's kind of give everybody, the audience, kind of an introduction from a philosophical standpoint and kind of where we're coming from, right? So like Sean says, we love the state, right? I'm a transplant. I'm a South Carolinian who, by way of the United States Air Force, discovered the land of enchantment back in 1997 when I first got here as a veteran. So look, as we kind of reach the end of the twilight of the previous administration, the Trump administration, and as we kind of try to kind of understand or take forward the things about the MAGA movement that we actually kind of appreciated, we need to start coming to some realizations that while national politics is extremely important, we're starting to reap some of the benefits, for lack to be charitable, of national politics. Really, we should probably retreat back from a Dunkirk perspective to dealing with issues at the state, local, and hell, even city and village level. And so we're just going to kind of point out issues. We're not going to always trash New Mexico, though she does a pretty good job of doing that herself. But we're going to highlight not only problems, but maybe solutions, and talk to people around the state from hopefully all political persuasions about how to deal with some of them issues.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a big part of what we do here. That's been a big part of everything I've done. I try to look for perspective on things. I try to speak to different people and understand where they're coming from. And even if we don't agree on everything, we have to find consensus. So that's going to be a big goal with what we're doing here. I was born and raised Farmington, New Mexico. My family ties here in New Mexico go way back. Cattle ranchers and, really the people who were involved in the founding of this state. So there's a lot of love here, a lot of understanding of the history, the different cultures and everything else. And that's really what we want to bring forward, which kind of brings us into our first topic, maybe.
Yeah, you see, here's where we kind of have to walk that line between not necessarily trashing the state, but pointing out some of the imperfections. So for those of you who haven't been paying attention, and that's what we're going to try to inform you guys about. The census numbers finally got tallied, right? And so the hubbub was about the fact that like California is losing congressional seats, and New York is losing congressional seats, and I think even Ohio lost congressional seats, and states that were, for lack of a better word, refuge, taking in the refugees from these states, Texas, Florida, whatever, gained seats. Even our beloved neighbor to the north, Colorado, gained a seat. But with that said, when it comes to the West and population-wise, New Mexico didn't necessarily shrink, but we didn't grow. Not at the rates we've grown at. We've grown at rates of like 20% in the 90s and like 13.9% in the 2000 early part of the 2000s. But this time around, we only grew at 2.8%.
Well,
the only state that did worse than this was Miami.
It has been stagnant here, though. I mean, that's the reality, is that even since the last, recession, 2009, things have not really improved in New Mexico. So we can look at these numbers and we can say, okay, well, we're shrinking. Why are we shrinking?
Yeah.
And that just isn't improving. And so maybe we need to dig into why. You mentioned Texas as being one of these places that is growing. I mean, you have the top 5 states, I've got them right here, are Idaho, Arizona, Utah, and Texas, and Nevada. Those are the top 5 growing states. So why are they growing while New Mexico's in decline?
Policies, period. Full stop. And there's, I have anecdotal evidence that this has always been a trend, right? Look, if it wasn't for oil and gas, right, or the fact that we have very smart people working at our weapons laboratories, we wouldn't have grown at all. The simple fact of the matter is, and the political powers that be in the state are going hardcore against one of the main areas in energy production, and that is the Permian Basin, right? If they're not looking for methane as some new gas that we should probably try to suppress, and hence we need to stop extraction. If it's not that, it's something else that's, it's dirty. It's not an energy we want. And so we lose talent that way. I knew a kid who graduated from UNM, smart kid, did some activism for the AFP network. Guy went to Austin, right? A lot of people I know who used to work at some of the weapons laboratories and on base went to Colorado. Right. And it's not about taxes strictly. All right. People like to use that kind of, very binary choice, but it's a lot of things. It's really policy, and policy that encourages growth. And it's the flexibility to start new industries or to get into industries, something that we have suffered from for a very long time. From the GRT, gross receipts tax, for those of you who are not familiar with, is nothing more than a VAT tax at the state level, to just generally speaking, like the regulatory burden to do anything in this state. Hence, we make it hard to start a new Netflix type company here, but we will throw money at a Netflix type company here. We think that renewable energies are going to be our godsend. And while that is true in the eastern part of the state and in the southern part of the state where we can get sun, we are then just throwing bad money after good. And so people kind of graduate from here and they kind of look around and they see, well, I don't necessarily want to work for the war machine that is like, the military industrial complex, which is a big portion of what we do. I'm going to go somewhere else. And they typically just go somewhere else. We're also aging. And we're aging because this is actually not a bad place to retire. Right. That's the only positive I can really say. It's like, it's not a bad place to retire. Actually, I tell a lot of people back east when I go home, like, New Mexico is a beautiful state. I mean, you don't got to live in Albuquerque. You don't got to live in Santa Fe and Taos and all these, hero cities that make us, the Southwest. You can go down, you go up to Farmington where Sean lives. It's beautiful up there. You can go down south, near, TRC. It's beautiful. And I don't know, well, I can go on forever about this, but it's.
Yeah, I mean, New Mexico has its problems, but we also have these great resources. One of those is these natural resources, whether you're talking about oil and gas, or if you want to talk about the sunshine. So obviously, I think there is a certain amount of energy that can be brought out by solar. But the reality is that the majority of the income in this state still comes from the oil and gas. And when you have, New Mexico, they legislated that they wanted to, get us off of all of the fossil fuels by 2045. And so they've been essentially killing that industry in that way. And now you have the Biden administration coming in and reinstating regulations prior that were rolled back by the Trump administration. It's estimated that it's going to cost this state $45 billion over the next 20 years. That's not a good way to incentivize people to stay in this state when you're killing the industries that do work. It's kind of crazy where you have things that work, and then you have pipe dreams. And it seems as though a certain amount of our leadership is just obsessed with pushing the pipe dream.
And it's all of our leadership. Someone who we hope to have on the show in the future was D. Dowd Muska. Breaks this down like in great detail, as well as Paul Gessing from the Rio Grande Foundation break this down all the time. This is a bipartisan affair to chase behind all these dreams, right? And throw money at big mega corps, right? We are really going to be three industries in the future and stuff like that. We're going to be like the warehouse of the Southwest. We're going to be the weapons stockpile of the Southwest and the, retirement home of the Southwest.
Yeah.
And while that all is well and good, that is not a diversified economy if you go to the north. The one industry that we actually did grow natively here, which was our beer and wine, subsequent cities and states have been kind of making it more and more difficult to even do that. And so they actually have a nasty tendency to strangle in the crib a lot of industries. We had machine learning and complexity science foundation companies that actually originated out of the northern New Mexico, out of the Santa Fe Institute and stuff like that. And like all those companies got snatched up by California companies or companies from other states, and that talent went elsewhere. And you're not enticing people here. We can't even. This is not the episode to get into the fact that the education system, having had two kids go through the education system in this state, it's pathetic. It is pathetic.
Well,
right?
that goes back to policies. That goes back to policies, which leads us right into the other, it's like the elephant in the room. But the way our governor here has dealt with COVID and continues to deal with the ongoing COVID, and I don't even know if we call it a crisis anymore.
I think we're past crisis.
Yeah. So Scracy says that we need to get to 60% vaccination before we can open the state. Okay, but there's really nothing that suggests that 60% even leads to herd immunity. Right. The other problem when you start talking about vaccination is that 30% of New Mexico healthcare workers, nurses, they don't want to get it.
Right.
So you have to accept the reality that most of the people in this state now have gotten the vaccine that want it. Like everybody who wants it has gotten it. And I think we're seeing that nationwide.
Yeah. Let's back this up with numbers then. Okay. So let's break this down, right? Why are we, all the reasoning why we should just open now. Waiting until June is dumb. I mean, I'm sorry. I should probably use more. I should use more better words, but it's dumb. So let's put it to you this way: how many people in the state of New Mexico have been infected? Well, the amount of people who've been infected, if you believe the numbers, is 10% of the population at 198,000 people. Let's just round it up to 200,000, right?
Sure.
I being one of them. Next, the amount of people who've been administered at least one dose of COVID-19, 1.82 million. The amount of people who've been fully vaccinated, 796,000, or let's just round it up to 800,000. What is the efficacy, not efficacy, what is the effectiveness of just getting one dose of one of our miracle vaccines? It's 80%. So what is the effectiveness of the flu vaccine versus all the variants that happen, right? Every year we get a report from the CDC, if you believe the science. 40 to 60% is the effective rate of this year's 2019-2020 flu vaccine. So that begs the reason that if this vaccine for COVID-19 is so effective at just one dose, and we already have 10% of the population already had, according to the statistics, have had this, plus 86% have received at least one dose, we're good. We're good. We are past this. This is done. We're past herd immunity at this point. Yeah,
It is
no,
what it is.
this, what's the pause? What's the pregnant pause to wait till June? What's the holdup?
Well, I don't know that we want to get too into why we think that pause is happening. I mean, I'll just say it.
Power.
Power. And, our governor, we'd love to have her on here if she'd ever grace us with her presence. I just want to make that clear. So I don't want to burn any bridges unnecessarily. But her decision making has been ridiculous. And I don't think it's possible to defend it. The economy was already struggling, and now you've just destroyed it. And how do you expect it to come back? Which then leads into the next problem, which is you have, what is the number? It was 78,000 New Mexicans on unemployment. And they get up to $784 a week. So we won't open the state until we get to 60% vaccination rate, so that we have their magical, not based, in any sort of real understanding, even according to Dr. Scracy, that we'll get to this herd immunity. But you have all these people on unemployment, and now you have the sectors of the economy that are starting to open up with all of our turquoise levels and our green levels and all these magical colors that they put there. But nothing's happening.
Right.
And nobody wants to go back to work because they've found that it's easier to sit on unemployment and collect a check. And what's interesting to me is that it gets reported and they say, well, a lot of people are scared to go back to work because of COVID. That doesn't make any sense because, again, as we've discussed, everybody who's scared of COVID has probably gotten their vaccine. And shouldn't people who've been vaccinated be immune and safe from COVID? Or are we just kind of having a misunderstanding of all this and ramping up the fear, as always, and finding an excuse for that? Meanwhile, you have Michelle Lujan Grisham saying that, well, we need to look into, reinstating the policy that people have to do 2 job applications a week in order to maintain their unemployment. Well, it's like, oh, so you're saying that when people are given the choice between free money from the government or actually working from it, they're going to take free money from the government?
It's funny. We haven't learned this lesson. This happened in 2009 through 2012, where it wasn't until the 99 weeks of unemployment went away that people were incentivized to do something about it. And they're admitting, slyly, that we must prod people to work and be productive by enforcing some sort of, accountability. So they're already proving their point, right? And scared of getting COVID. That's a lie. No one's scared anymore of getting COVID because either you're right. If you are scared of it, you're getting fully vaccinated, or like myself, I've had it. I have the natural immunity necessary. Come back to me next year during next COVID season, and maybe I'll get a shot. But for right now, I don't really see the need of it. We have approached the herd immunity necessary. But here's the deal. There's this psychological damage that has been done, not only to the work ethic of this state, which is, no offense to my fellow New Mexicans, is lacking. And I can tell you this by the fact that I have children in the workforce who actually bust their butts. And typically when they get hired, always move up the chain because we have very terrible work ethic. That, on top of the fact that you've scared the heck out of people for the last 18 months, or 13 months to be blunt, to be more accurate. The economy will take years to recover from this. And we're being asked to absorb a lot of government largesse that is having social, economic, catastrophic results.
Especially in a state that was already depressed.
Correct.
And we've said it multiple times on our other programs, but I can't blame a waitress who's dealt with, the crap world of trying to get tips, to make their living, being given the opportunity to stay home with their children and get money for it. I can't blame them for taking that option. Why would they ever want to go back to that? It has nothing to do with fear of COVID. Maybe it has to do with an understanding of just how crappy a lot of these jobs are and how hard it has become to make it in New Mexico. I mean, obviously, even in my business, my plumbing businesses, I moved most of my operations out of state because things had been so depressed here. Every time they come after the oil and gas industry, they depress the entire economy. And so all you needed on top of that was a little bit of COVID. But before we start going down the road of blackpilling too much and ripping too much, we're going to get somebody on here who actually comes up with some creative solutions for all sorts of things. Brett Kokinadis, how are you doing?
Hey guys, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on the pilot.
Yeah, well, it seemed only reasonable. So
it was your great idea.
we've had all these problems. What are some solutions in your mind?
Well, you've talked a lot about different issues here with unemployment. What people didn't really understand was that this money has to come from somewhere, right? We saw that in the early onset of Workforce Solutions burning through New Mexico's fund. We went out and got federal money to keep that fund going. Granted, it's at 0% interest, but we still got to pay that loan back. So we're having all these new issues. The first one, like you talked about, the governor saying that she's going to prod and poke people to return to the workforce. This is having an effect on local small businesses trying to find employees. They're closing down quick serve restaurants in Santa Fe. Just the other day, I drove past one and said, sorry, we're closed, not enough staff. We've seen that happen in other places. The second issue is that we have to recuperate this money. So I've been talking about this now for several months about how they're talking about all the stimulus money that's coming into the system from New Mexico, from the federal government. But at the end of the day, the businesses are going to incur additional costs in the form of unemployment insurance, which the governor has already kind of signaled towards. You've seen some businesses starting to talk about that. And when you have the progressive media talking about a fair tax on big businesses, what they don't really articulate is that any person can be a corporation. A one-person business is a corporation. Sean, you mentioned you're in plumbing. I'm sure you're some type of corporate entity. Yeah. And you'll have the argument where they say, well, this is only in businesses that produce $500,000 a year or more. Now, if you're not a business owner, if you're not a small business owner, $500,000 might sound like a lot of money. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about overhead, employees, when you look at your restaurants, most of the businesses that we patron on an ongoing basis produce more than $500,000 a year in revenue. Now, that's not profit, right? That's not money going into their pocket, but that's going to be the trigger point for these businesses. The second issue you've talked about people moving out of the state. Well, that's because there isn't a lot of hope for young people, whether you're an entrepreneur or just, a career professional. You have your national laboratories, you have some government work, you have the state as being one of the largest corporate employers, if we want to call it that. The governor will say we have a shortage of 4,000 employees that we've had a hiring freeze on. The issue is that New Mexico is not investing in itself. And we see that across different disciplines. The first is through LEDA funds, or the local economic development funds that are going into the state. We look at businesses and try to bring them into New Mexico to create jobs and to create a better economy. But at the end of the day, these businesses are not hiring New Mexicans at the volume that they say that they're going to. A lot of times these monies are going into places where we're recruiting outside businesses instead of investing in businesses that already exist in the state. A perfect example was giving $2 million of the LEDA fund to a company called Brick Gold. I don't know anything about the company other than they produce industrial legal hemp. They were bringing it to Dona Ana County. They promised all these jobs, got all this money. And at the end of the day, when you look across New Mexico in our agricultural communities, we could have been making that investment locally, which would have had a bigger impact on hiring the New Mexicans that are looking for work, increasing the value and prosperity of the agricultural families. Instead, we hear reports coming out in primary media about LEDA funds going to state reps' families and building these businesses that, are not in production yet. And they're receiving it to the tune of millions of dollars in these special funds. From my personal experience, when we look at the SIC, or the State Investment Council or Committee, they do a great job at generating returns for the state. That's what they're chartered to do. But their hands have been kind of tied about what they can invest in. And it's really two different types of principles and mentality as an investor. One is, I'm willing to take this money and invest it with the expectation that I'm going to get a return for my stakeholders. And the second is I want to be a little bit more risky and bring ideas to life to create a better opportunity. And these are the mindsets of a venture capitalist. They're not out there looking for the sure deal. They're looking at everything that has a perfect storm, and they're willing to take a risk for a bigger gain. Now, the SAC, I participated in trying to raise venture capital for one of my businesses years ago here. And the problem is that the state had access to money, but couldn't be the primary investor. They had to be a co-investor with follow-on venture capitalists. And what this creates is an environment for incubators like ABQID, Innovate ABQ, the Santa Fe Business Incubators, where they can nurture some of these businesses from local angel funds, local and small investors. But these businesses get to a point where they need to focus on like a Series A or maybe a bridge loan to get them to the next level. And the situation is that you'll get these out-of-state VCs that say, yeah, we love the idea, we're going to invest, but you're going to have to move your business to California or to Colorado or to Texas because they want to be close to that investment.
Yeah, that's what happened with a lot of the stuff up north in your neck of the woods or in Santa Fe. Is like I said, when it came to complexity theory, complexity science, the early days of really data science, a lot of companies were created up there in Santa Fe.
Yep.
And as time went on, and these companies, you're right, started moving into Series A, Series B funding rounds. What the strings attached with that money were, well, we're going to need you guys to move to California, Colorado, whatever. And yeah, we've seen that. So Brett, talk to us a little bit about, because I just to kind of dovetail on what you were saying of like the regulatory burden on top of the fact that like these places are trying to open back up. What new regulatory burdens are going to be put on these front-facing businesses that actually interface with customers that's going to make it even immensely more difficult for a small entity that makes this, say, over $500,000 a year to even compete or draw business or just survive?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have a lot of things that we're competing against, and unfortunately, it's not a short list. When we talk about the will and desire and need to return to work, I think that's the most pressing one. When we have the federal government talking about PPP extensions or payroll protection extensions, we have the EIDL extensions that are giving businesses access to funds. We have some state programs that are giving them access to either grants or loans. And the governor and her administration has been very vocal about how great they're doing in the forms of providing liquidity access to these businesses. At the end of the day, the businesses don't want liquidity per se. They want customers. They want revenue. We don't want debt. Yes, it's 3.75%, but if you take that out on $100,000 over the 30-year period from the SBA, you're basically paying $70,000 in interest back. So, is it worth it? Yes, maybe for the moment you need access to that capital, and that's great, but we need to get these businesses back on track. You've also talked about gross receipts tax. That's a big issue about why businesses don't want to be here. The other issue is, trying to find a model to mimic. We heard last week about Wyoming recognizing new types of business entities created in the crypto market space. They're leading the way with that. You look at other states like Nevada and Delaware, where they've created tax incentives for businesses to register in their state, whether they have a physical location in that state or have nexus in that state or not. They're paying annual residual franchising fees, and in some cases, income taxes, to have the privilege of having those tax benefits and being registered in that state. If we create a more friendly environment based upon investment, based upon employment and predictability in this state, we will see more people starting to invest and call New Mexico home for their businesses. At the end of the day, we have 66 economic opportunity zones under President Trump's tax relief cut. Those haven't been used to my understanding in the state. We have a LEDA system that isn't investing in this state. We have bad tax policies. And now, during a pandemic, if you want to call it that, we've had issues about all of these incentives for employees saying, well, they're going to get paid time off if they work 40 hours a week. We're going to hold businesses accountable for COVID outbreaks if they haven't followed the public health orders, which there's no way to prove those things. These are all additional risks that businesses and investors will face on an ongoing basis and deter them from incorporating or doing business in New Mexico.
Well, it's additional regulations. That's what it's. I think it's the nature of the state, of government in general, and people who are involved in it, where they say, well, there's a problem, we need to do something. And their answer is always more regulation and less freedom. And I don't think that that's going to be productive. And it's been proven time over time here in New Mexico. When you go to other states and you do things there, you find that it's much easier. I mean, I know that in Colorado, for instance, with my business, it was much easier to do things there than it was in New Mexico. The costs are ridiculous. I mean, even when I get into licensing and those sorts of regulations, they're much more burdensome here. And it doesn't seem to be much of a pushback. There seems to be a lot of talk, but not a whole lot of action. And I know, Brett, you're Republican, and I'll rip on Republicans all day, because there does seem to be this attitude where they're just comfortable to be there. Like, they're just happy to be invited to the dance, but they don't really want to do anything to fight back against that Democratic establishment that has led New Mexico down this road for so long.
Well, Sean, keep in mind, I was not always a Republican. I was actually a Democrat. I became Republican because of the policies that the Democratic arm or progressive arm of the Democratic Party was pushing. At the end of the day, when we talk about Republicans, we're much more aligned with the freedom aspect of businesses and entrepreneurs. We talked about the tax rates. These tax rates are not just for corporations. These will affect gig workers. We see those attacks happening in California and the like, where they're going after the gig workers who might be on Fiverr, or might be an Uber driver or a Lyft driver. And these organizations failed the test to meet the qualification for an employer under the three-pronged test of the IRS. So we're going to see more of these policies drive out economies, whether that be businesses or gig workers. And at the end of the day, what we really need to focus on is not about being Democrat or Republican or independent. It's about focusing on the issues that affect all of us at home. And I think that's what we're going to see in this next wave. We have a sitting governor that's going to run for re-election. She's going to tout her record about how great she's done for New Mexico on COVID-safe policies and COVID-safe practices, saving all these lives. And in the beginning, I understood that. But we're past that point. Like you said, I see people walking out on the street. Not many of them are wearing a mask. I just came back from Nevada. Very few people were wanting to wear a mask. Florida, you don't have anybody. Tennessee, you don't have anybody. And we're not seeing these numbers surge. We have to start opening it up. Even the mayor of Albuquerque, he came out and said, well, Albuquerque has a crime problem that hasn't gotten addressed because of the legislature not taking enough action. Well, if you look at our legislature is 100% controlled by progressive Democrats. So you can't be part of the progressive Democrat Party and then say, well, our progressive party that's in full control isn't doing enough to solve the problems. You're blaming yourself. Yeah. So that's the one silver lining that we have in this, is that there's no one left to blame except progressive policies.
So yeah, it's funny. When I lived here earlier in the 90s, or late in the 90s and early 2000s and stuff, you actually had sensible Democrats. Now, say what you will about the gangster that was Bill Richardson. At least in his first term, he understood fiscal responsibility, right? And there was no pie in the sky, avenues of trying to reshape the economy in the image of the industries and or people that they think are contributing to our diversity. Going back to the story talking about the census, they're trying to spin this census as if like, well, at least our diversity increased when it came to Native Americans and Hispanics and all this other stuff. And it's just like, yeah, but we didn't grow. Yeah, we live in one of the most beautiful, most resource-rich states probably in the Southwest. We didn't grow.
Yeah, and we're not going to grow. And that's the problem. I mean, we see they'll tout about the economic factors about New Mexico becoming a retirement destination and tourist destination. Well, tourism is pretty much out because of COVID until that gets lifted. Retirement, they're not going to be a ongoing contributing factor to economic development. It's at the end of the day, they're going to buy their home. They're going to enjoy their time here. They do have expendable income. But when we look at the youth, the families here, we need to worry about carrying on for the next generation, making sure those families have opportunity here, and they don't. The universities, you look at university enrollment, education enrollment, that's down. Any student, if I was in my mid to late 20s, I would look at it and say, well, what opportunities exist here for me and my professional career? And unless I'm working for the lab or the state, there really isn't much.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess that needs to be the conversation a little bit, is what can normal people, your average New Mexican, what can they do in their own life to improve this situation, to try to grow this state and improve their lives? I mean, I think it's easy to sit here and talk about government policies. There's only so much that's going to be done within the legislature. And I don't like pointing the finger at everyone else with this stuff, which is very easy to do. So I think it's important to talk about what we can do as New Mexicans to improve this. I mean, do we need to start taking stands? Do we need to start opening up regardless of public health policy that, really we've seen is excessive? I mean, what do you think people need to do, Brett?
Well, you need to get involved, and that's the number one key. I mean, I'm not advocating for people to disobey orders and things like that, because that's not really productive in the long term. What's productive in the long term is changing the political climate in the state, and we do that by getting involved in your community, in your local party, in your local grassroots movements, and you start interviewing and finding candidates that really share the similar values. Same thing with, if you're very passionate about this, run for office. I'm not an elected official. I gave it a go. I gave it a really hard go at my first time, but I haven't given up fighting in this process. We launched Stop MLG, which sent 300,000 emails to the Roundhouse on behalf of New Mexicans. We're working on other projects like New Mexico Rising. It's about educating the public and making sure that the public just doesn't go complacent with the fact of, well, this is how it is, and it's unfortunate. They need to get involved, because this is your home. This is going to affect your real estate, which, now it's in a bubble. This is going to affect your children's education. It's going to affect their future if they decide to stay here or move on. And it's affecting a lot of people's decision if they're going to reside and stay in New Mexico. So if you love this state and you want to call this home, you owe it to yourself and your community to be involved in some way.
And build. We need to encourage people to build. I think part of what I would like to bring to the show was, I want to talk to entrepreneurs and people who are in the grind, making this happen, right? Nascent industries that can and should exist in this state because of our, talent from the labs, because of the innovation, because of the hustle and stuff like that. I think the biggest thing that people think that needs to strictly happen and only happen is, like, we must get involved with the political process. And while that is important, and yeah, we should definitely bring on people who are going to advance the causes that we think will make New Mexico rise, the other thing is, let's venerate the entrepreneur. Let's venerate the venture capitalists. Let's venerate the people who are going to make it possible to build the future of this state and build businesses in this state and to build the things in this state that are going to keep people here and get people to come here. And I think
and I agree 100% with you, that is. But I mean, when you look at the prefix to this conversation, we've talked about why those things don't happen. We've talked about the investment issue. We've talked about the gross receipts tax issue. We've talked about the employment issue. These are policy issues, and we have to address those first before we can expect anything of significance. So, what people really need to pay attention to is getting rid of the fluff. We've had the past 4 years or so be just this political divide of, well, you don't wear my team's shirt, so I hate you. But at the end of the day, when you look at the issues, all New Mexicans really want the same issues and the same solutions. We all want great, affordable, reliable healthcare. We don't want crime. We want to see crime reduction in our major cities and keeping our communities safe. We want to make sure every child gets a world-class education, and we want to have high-paying, well-paying jobs that aren't necessarily dictated by the government, but are there because we've done a successful job at creating a prosperous economy. And where we disagree on the political front is not on those issues, but we disagree on how we get there and the solutions. And I'll say it again, the progressive have full control. The Progressive Party has full control of everything that's happening at your state and local level. So as we see, they're not being successful. They're actually creating more problems. And at the end of the day, this is going to hit the pocketbooks and families of all New Mexicans. So when it starts hitting you at home, when you start seeing less money on your check, or you start seeing your gas prices go up, your electricity prices go up, your food costs go up, this is because you've remained complacent and you've gone along with the emotional sell of the Progressive Party instead of the facts and figures and looking at the true impact of what's happening.
Well said,
Oh,
Brett. Thank you for coming on.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. I look forward to being back on the show, and I think this is awesome. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
no problem.
Anything we can do. Well, Thad, we'll wrap it up. Everybody who watched this pilot episode, we really appreciate you. Hopefully, we'll get.
Thanks a lot.
We don't know what producer Chris is doing back there. It looks like he's doing something. He might be working. Well, we're going to try to do this at least once a week, and we'll be finding other places where we can stream this too. We appreciate everyone who's reacted, everyone who's shared, everyone who watched. You guys help make this happen. If you have an issue that you want us to bring up, if you have a story that you'd like us to investigate, I will travel. And we will do everything we can to kind of dig into the real issues and the real people in New Mexico and bring it from a perspective of real New Mexicans and polish it as much as we can in the meantime.
Correct.
Good.
Keeping it clean. All right.
Keep it clean.
All right. Producer Chris, take us out of here, man.